Welcome to Spread the Light, where we use the power of our own stories of living with mental illness to help dispel stigma and stereotypes, and instead spread hope and light. I'm your host, Dr. Devika Bhushan. I'm a pediatrician, a public health leader, a parent, an immigrant from India, and somebody with lived experience with bipolar disorder. And today I'm really lucky to welcome to the show Andy Dunn, who many of you will know well. And for those of you who are new to his story, he's an entrepreneur, author, investor, and father, and co-founded the menswear brand Bonobos, which sold for $310 million. Last year, he published a memoir called Burn Rate, which detailed his up until then private journey with bipolar disorder. So with that, Andy, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about your story for those who are new to you.
Devika, doctor, I guess I should call you. Thanks so much for having me and for doing this. I'm super excited to be here. And, where do you think we should begin?
So tell us a little bit about how your mental health journey started.
So it started with a diagnosis that I was wholly unprepared for, and therefore in abject denial of for the next 16 years, which is too long. It's too long to be processing a diagnosis. And a big part of why I care about this mission of talking about mental health is to decrease the time from diagnosis to acceptance, because these things are they're difficult enough without the denial. And obviously the denial is rooted in the stigma, and it's a vicious cycle. But for me, it began when I was 20. I was a senior in college. I had a severe manic episode, psychosis, messianic delusion, racing speech. It was a mixed manic episode, which means alternating between euphoria as well as profound sadness, crying, then moving to angry, talking about sort of the standard manic playbook of being the second coming of God or whatever. The types of, retrospectively humiliating things that made this so difficult for me to talk about, which we didn't talk about it. My Midwestern upbringing, Punjabi Indian immigrants on my mom's side, Scandinavian Midwesterners on my dad's side, very different cultures, but with a unifying attribute, which is just a total desire to not talk about or engage in issues of mental health. Certainly that was the case 23 years ago. Hopefully it's evolving. So yeah, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1. It was January of the year 2000. I was a senior in college, and that was the beginning of the journey.
Right. And, you've written very powerfully about this experience. And I'll quote something from your book that really stuck out to me when I read it. And there were lots of areas where I was underlining and starring and, drawing words out. But this piece really stuck with me. So you say bipolar disorder is an illness that can undergird greatness and seek to destroy it at the same time. And so, thinking about those words and what you were encapsulating there, can you share with us what you would think of as the hardest parts of your journey?
I think that the worst moments for me with bipolar were the phases of depression where I didn't want to live and feeling so ungrateful for this life, to have so many things to live for, but to not actually want to live was it's just a very strange thing to know one thing, which is there are so many things to live for, but to feel another, which is I don't want to be here.
Right.
And those moments were hard and, would come and go for 8 years. So it was sort of this dance of I'm feeling good, I'm feeling hypomanic, I'm coming a little bit off the rails on the high side, but I'm energized, I'm working hard, and then slipping into this blackness, usually lasting between 1 and 3 months. And unfortunately, not being in therapy, not being on medication, not seeing a doctor due to my inability to accept it. And those periods just being like, when does this end? How do I get out? And then on the flip side, and maybe this is part and parcel with an illness sometimes referred to or historically referred to as manic depressive illness, the manic episode that I had in 2016, where the mania that I hadn't really experienced since I was a senior in college came back, included an episode of violence, and I was charged with felony and misdemeanor assault and thought I would lose everything I cared about. That was just horrible. It's just horrible to go through the legal system, to go through the professional, the sense of professional collapse, like my career's over.
Right.
And then the fear of losing my then girlfriend, who was the love of my life and the first person that I thought maybe we would spend our lives together. So to go from, so many things were going well to just, the lack of willingness on my part to accept what I knew I had. I'd been diagnosed with it. Just this sort of calamitous black swan event that wasn't actually a black swan at all. A black swan is a retrospectively predictable event that's unpredictable at the time. It's very easy to predict another manic episode if you have bipolar 1, right? That's a part of the deal. So those dark moments of depression and that acute episode of mania and what followed come to mind when you ask me about the worst moments.
Right. And how was it, Andy, that you were able to come to a place where you were able to accept this as part of your life, this disorder, and the need for treatment? How did that evolve for you?
I had a former psychiatrist who was an executive coach, who became an executive coach. And he, while I was in the go-go days of building my startup, was the reason that I thought maybe I didn't have bipolar, because I asked him. I told him my story, and he knew me well. He knew the ups and downs, and he felt that my ups and downs were within bounds of the startup roller coaster. And I talked in my TED Talk about how being an entrepreneur can be a cloak for a mood disorder, because it is expected that the job creates a mood disorder.
Right.
That
the
it can
ups
be
and downs,
a way,
the unpredictability, right?
Yeah, that it can be a way to conceal the underlying mood disorder that might be amplifying those ups and downs. And so I had a lot of people fooled, because they were just like, yeah, of course this guy's off the rails. He's an entrepreneur.
Right.
Of course he disappears at times, because entrepreneurs are mercurial. So he actually solidified my desired narrative that this diagnosis had been in error. And because I had been using psilocybin around that time, there was a narrative advance that my 20-year-old psychosis was actually substance-driven something else. I was taking a powerful acne medication at the time that was linked to mental health issues. I think that's sort of dubious in retrospect, that there probably was more of a coincidence thing happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we know that substance use can interact with mental illness, obviously, but that doesn't mean that it's the cause of it. And it's another ingredient in there. So when I had the second catastrophic episode in 2016, look, I was 36 years old, which is very different than being 20. I'd been through more stuff. And in a way, I wanted this explanation for the depression that I dealt with, because it's like, okay, fine. Like, yes, let's take this on and then figure out what the treatment is. And,
Right.
He actually made the referral to my now psychiatrist and therapist. And I remember sitting down with him. I had to find a venue where I wouldn't be tempted by alcoholic beverages. So we had a meeting at this tea shop in Midtown, and we were drinking tea. And I said, hey, I kind of do have this bipolar thing, don't I? Because he had told me that I might not. And I needed to hear from him.
Right.
And he also had been so helpful prior to helping me navigate the ups and downs, even if the bipolar was concealed. And then he was the person that referred me to the doctor that I was about to start seeing. So I wanted to talk about that. And he was like, yeah, you do. It's without a doubt at this point, right? Because the meds come back. And then I just wanted to be better. I wanted so badly to be better. I didn't want to put my family through what they'd just gone through. I didn't want to lose Manuela, who's now my wife. I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to be violent again. I was like, I want to do everything in my power now with a unvarnished, clear-eyed, deep acceptance that this, I would say, is my cross to bear, but with a lurking messianic delusion, we shouldn't be talking about crosses to bear. And so I wanted to be better. And I had no doubt that this was my illness. I met every DSM criteria, 100% of the DSM criteria applied to me. So it was like, all right, let's go. Let's get healthy.
Right. And it sounds like that second big manic episode, with the violence that came with it and all of the ways in which it shook up your personal life, your professional life, that was really your turning point of saying, okay, yes, there is a demon to name here. You called it a ghost, right, in your memoir. And there are ways in which we know that this demon or ghost can be tamed. And I'm willing to put in the work, and I want to do this to try to make sure it doesn't come back for me in this way ever again. So I think that's a really powerful thing so many years into having symptoms. I'm just curious, as you're looking back at that whole journey and knowing everything you know now that you figured out about yourself, about the disorder, about your profession, your personal life, what would you go back and tell your younger self, young Andy at 20 when you first had that episode, or all of those depressive episodes in between the two big manic episodes? What's a message that you wish you could have given yourself?
I would say first, I'm so sorry that you have to take this on. This is a heavy thing to take on. And I have such good news for you, which is it's eminently treatable. This is something that you can deal with. Like, you can do this. You can keep this contained. This isn't a death sentence. This isn't even something that means your quality of life inevitably will be diminished.
Right.
But you have to deal with it. You are very likely going to need to take medication every day for the rest of your life.
Right.
And I know that's a hard thing to hear, but what I'm effectively saying is you have to put a small object into your mouth and drink a half a glass of water with it. That's it. But you're going to probably have to do that every day. And you're probably going to need to see a physician with some meaningful frequency, or a combination of a physician, a psychiatrist, and a therapist. And by the way, that probably sounds bad, but it's actually, you're going to find one day a gift in its own right to be able to really have to do this thing, therapy, that it's actually going to improve your quality of life. Because life is hard, separate from bipolar disorder. And having someone trained who you can process your life with is going to make you a better friend, son, communicator, employee, all these things. And so just take a beat right now and take your meds and see a doctor, and just let's walk through this together for the next 6 or 8 weeks. It's going to take you a while to feel well. And I have some good news too. I have some good news to share from the future. which is neurodiversity, when contained, can be an asset too. And let me tell you about famous people from history who have had bipolar disorder. Let's talk about Alexander Hamilton. Let's talk about Vincent van Gogh. Let's talk about all these different folks who we think maybe in retrospect had this. It can be a superpower too, but it has a kryptonite. It's a superpower with kryptonite. And so let's figure that out. Maybe one day you'll even look back at this as something to process with gratitude, that you were gifted with this superpower if you're willing to contain the challenges and the harm that it can do. Something along those lines.
I love it. What a powerful letter to your former self.
Yeah, maybe I need to write this one.
I love that. That's wonderful. A couple of threads to pick up on. So one is, earlier this year on World Bipolar Day, you, I, and other folks got together to help bust some myths around bipolar disorder. And yours was that medication doesn't necessarily have to dull you with bipolar disorder. And that was something that you changed your mind on along the way as you were going through your journey. And so we'll definitely feature that myth that you've busted. But is there any other in the mental health space that you feel like you want to lay the truth on today?
I want to bust a myth on bipolar disorder that medication necessarily is going to dull you. I know why that myth exists because I experienced it. When I was first diagnosed with bipolar 1, I was 20 years old. I was prescribed a big pink pill and it numbed me. I went off the meds within 6 months, and regrettably I stayed off for 16 years until it came raging back with a lot of hypomania and depressive episodes in between. When it did come raging back, it did so in a really bad way. I committed myself to the reality that I needed to take medication every day. And it would take time to figure out the right cocktail, the right dosages, the right medications. It took about 6 months. And I can confidently tell you that it doesn't dull me. I feel amazing and so grateful that these medications exist. So don't give up. You're going to get there.
There's so many ways that we could go with this. What comes to mind is the idea that you're somehow different is true and it's false. Like, the truth is that you have this particular stripe of neurodiversity that maybe 1% to 3% of adults live with bipolar. But setting that aside, you're joining a pretty big club, right? So we think 1/3 of us live with some kind of mental health condition. In the little world I swim in of creative entrepreneur, fill in the blank, quote unquote visionaries, people that build stuff, that number might be as high as 60%. And look, here's the deal. The other 40% of us, of everyone, we're fully covered with at some point facing an acute issue of mental health, because mental health challenges don't require a mental illness to become acute or to endure in our lives. There's grief, there's relationships, there's the end of a relationship, there's problematic relationships, there's sexual abuse, there's physical abuse, there's financial stress, there's job related. There's not a human that makes it to 40 without being thrown on their ass by something. Mm-hmm. Whatever the saying is, we all have mental health, right? And it's true. So it's like, I remember when I got glasses when I was like 12, and I felt bad for myself because I was like, oh, now I have glasses. Not everyone does. And it's true. There are some lucky people among us who have perfect vision. And it doesn't matter when you're an adult because you're like, all right, whatever, who cares? But as a 12-year-old kid, that was really upsetting to me.
It's a big deal when you're in school. Yeah.
It's kind of like that. Like, yeah, you got to wear glasses. And one day you won't even be thinking about it as a problem if you wear them. It's if you don't wear them that you're screwed because you can't see. Like, so you got to wear these glasses. You now need to see the world through the frame of this issue, but it affects everyone. It's not like eyesight. No one is immune from challenges of mental health at some point in their lives. And then to the extent that you want to talk about mental illness, there's no family unaffected. If you look as wide as cousins and as far back as grandparents, so you kind of create that rectangle of going wide and back into the past, it's 100% probability that there is someone that faced severe mental illness in that family.
Totally.
There's almost no family that's been untouched by suicide at some point in the lineage. It's just, it's just the worst thing that can happen. So you're not so unique. You might be feeling really badly for yourself right now, but you've just been included in the human condition in a unique way. And so don't take on this idea that you're somehow different, or as I did, like some kind of like a human stain. Like I was this something bad. I felt like I was bad. I was broken. And it's not true. It's not true. You're not. So I think that's important. And then I think we touched on this idea of therapy. Like therapy is a real gift because life is hard. Being able to navigate life at times or in an enduring way with a great mental health professional is only the lucky among us get to do that. And part of it is access, part of it is affording it. But, a diagnosed mental illness is a kind of a kick in the butt that you probably have to do a fair amount of that. And later, that's a good thing, right? It's a gift to be in therapy, not a burden.
Yeah, absolutely. To pick up on another one of the threads you laid down just a moment ago, how do you feel like, how would you characterize the way in which your mental health journey has shaped your superpowers?
I mean, one thing I was really worried about going into the era of taking medication was, would I be able to access that kind of sparkly mood, where it feels like a lot is possible and where I feel up, like just feeling really up in a way that is good. And there can be a contagious positive energy to someone in a hypomanic state, full of ideas, a little looser verbally, funnier, kind of raw, candid. People who are in a hypomanic state can make you believe and inspire you and make you laugh. And you want to be around someone in a hypomanic state sometimes.
Sometimes. Although we're also very bad at letting people kind of get their opinions in, kind of soliciting feedback in those moments. But yes, I totally hear what you're saying. Like you're a face and a force to be reckoned with. You're funny, all of it.
Yes. No, those things are also true. And I actually spent a fair amount of time in the early years of my relationship with Manuela learning to shut up when I was in a good mood so that she could also be in a good mood too. So that she could also be expressing herself in an equal or even an unequal fashion, disproportionately on her side. So I had to learn when I came home in a good mood to not talk because to make space, right?
Right.
And then, we could get into other costs of hypomania, whether it's distractibility, irritability, high-risk behavior, poor judgment, substance. There's a lot of bad stuff. But setting aside the bad stuff and focusing selfishly on the good stuff, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to access that state. And my doctor helped me and he said, look, the goal is not to ward off peak life experiences. It's to make it controllable and to not let it slide up into an unhealthily high level of hypomania, let alone mania. So we used to talk about this scale of like mood from 1 to 10, where 1 was catatonic depression and 10 is mania. And, we kind of said, all right, 9 is dangerous hypomania and 8's getting close. How do we get the mood band that I would live in between 5 and 7 so that there was no day that was below a steady Eddie, like meaning avoiding depression, avoiding dysthymia as much as possible. I'm okay with a few 4s in there. I think that's okay. That's a part of life.
Yeah.
Got to feel a little low sometimes, but not not catatonically depressed or, ritually depressed. But being able to stretch into that 7 and maybe sometimes an 8, a day or two. And he said, we need to build a pharmacological regimen for you where you can live at 7 to 8 sometimes. He said, might we all be controllably hypomanic every day? That would be the dream. If we could all be a 7 out of 10 every day, the world would be a beautiful place. And so it was very difficult because it took about a year to get there. It took about a year because my depression coming off of the manic episode was so severe. 6 months of just not wanting to live at all coming off of the high, which is also typical. And because of the violence processing and the legal stuff and the job, it's just horrible. It's just a horrible 6 months. And the only reason I didn't succumb to the depression was I was so committed to, it's a weird word, but it comes to my mind, to like atoning for what everyone had just gone through. Like I felt like everyone deserved a better me than a manic, psychotic nightmare me. And I was so committed to that on behalf of others. And I think that's a helpful frame to have, which is like, don't do this just for you.
Right.
Do it for the people who love you. Do it for the people who are walking through this with you, whose, your mental illness is now their burden as well. And so think of the wonderful thing you can do by committing to your own health and doing everything you can to secure it, because it's a beautiful thing for your family and your friends and your loved ones too.
Absolutely.
But it took a year. It took a year to access that. And, it's fun to be in a really good mood. And I think a lot of folks who have bipolar, who go on meds, because it doesn't work at first, it's not going to work at first. They go off before giving it a chance. And I think the truth is, you know what? You're kind of screwed. Like, you're going to have to walk this for a year or 6 months. Like, this isn't going to just get fixed.
Right.
But people deal with that all the time on the physical illness front. If you blow out your knee, you've got to get surgery and you're on crutches for 6 months. If you get cancer, you may have to deal with, treatment for years. So, you know what? Life sucks. But you can't go off your meds because you don't feel like you. You just have to keep working through it, until you do. And I realize there's other kinds of treatments now. It's not just, there's ketamine therapy and there's the electromagnetic thing. And, it's exciting, actually. There's a lot of momentum with different kinds of treatment, and we should feel lucky for that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much in what you just shared. I think one thread that sometimes does get lost, but that you've pointed to again and again in your writing and in your speaking, that I think deserves, us holding up on a pedestal a little bit, is the fact that our family members and our loved ones are really the ones who have the starkest and sharpest memories of what we do and say and are when we're at our least well selves, right? And in so many ways, becoming aware of our own, tendencies and foibles around mental illness, and then learning to harness those experiences in ways that help you shine brightly, to use the electricity metaphor, rather than shock somebody in your life. Like, I think that is such a motivating force for so many of us, and such a source too of true remorse when we get well, to look back at what we've done to folks that we love and care deeply about in our lives. And I think part of our journeys, honestly, is learning to forgive our illnesses and our ill selves for those aspects that maybe we had way less control over than a lot of people would want us to believe.
Totally. And one of the gifts of writing this memoir was that I got to go back and interview my family about some of these moments, that it's so painful, actually, to unpack what transpired during psychosis. Set aside, like, for the person who went through it, but for the people who were there for it, that there's kind of like no incentive to do it outside of some like supernatural desire for like healing interfamilial trauma, which I would never have had the courage to do. But it was only because I needed to write as fair and accurate of assessment of what had transpired that the book forced me to like sit down with my dad and say like, what did I say to you? You know, when you were sitting on that green chair and I was lecturing you about, you know, all the things that white men had done wrong in human history. For some reason, I thought my dad embodied all of that. And I wanted to just grill him on why all of his heroes were white men. And it just, what was that conversation like for you? Like, what do you remember? What was I saying? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? Or sitting down with my mom and saying, you know, what happened on the sidewalk on Fifth Avenue? Like, did I throw you into a fence, Mom? Like, what happened? And oh my, I could shed a tear now thinking about it if I hadn't done so much therapy around not just like that, but the unpacking of it is also like traumatic, like revisiting it and seeing family revisit it. And that's why I think it's so much easier. And by the way, not like terribly hard to understand. Like, who wants to have that conversation? When your loved one is back, ideally, like who wants to be like, let's dig in to what you said and how I felt. And so this memoir for me was such a gift because I got to take like an author's distance from the vantage point of 6 years later and 1,000 therapy sessions later, that I was able to sit and have those conversations and to hold those feelings and be like, okay, like that wasn't my fault.
Right.
That wasn't my fault. What would be my fault? And it would be my fault would be if I maintained the denial. If I continued to reject care, that would be my fault. And I think it's important to parse those things. You did nothing wrong, but you might do something wrong going forward.
Right.
If you don't deal with what went wrong, you are now doing something wrong. And I think that's important for all of us to find a way to recognize that what transpires it's not our fault.
That is super powerful, and it must have been a really hard thing to walk through, but I'm sure extremely rewarding for everybody, you know, around the table to come to terms with it, for you to atone, for you to forgive yourself, and then be able to move forward from that. And so thinking about sort of this fact that, you know, bipolar is an illness that we have to think about and to deal with. All right. So, you know, thinking about how you keep yourself stable and well on a daily basis. You know, you talked about therapy, you've talked about taking medication every single day. What are some of the other ways in which you find to be really important to maintain your mental health? And then, you know, on the other end of that, when you do start to notice sort of some red flag symptoms, what do you do differently there?
Yeah, awesome question. Maybe the most important thing for me is sleep. Sleep is such a either lagging or leading indicator for me of a mood swing that I sort of know without fail that if I start sleeping 8 hours, 8:15, 8:30, 9, 9:15, 9:30, 10, that I'm headed into a depressive state. Because for me, depression manifests as can't get out of bed. My doctor likes to say 2 kinds of depression: can't sleep, can't get out of bed. I'm the can't get out of bed varietal.
I'm the other end.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. We need to swap chairs, by the way, at some point on running the light. So the flip side is hypomania for me starts as sleep descends below 6 hours. So 5.5, 5, 4.5, 4, you know, the alarm bells start to go off. And then if it gets to 3, 2, you know, it starts to get scary and kind of raise the flag pretty highly on that. We can talk about it. And then like 0 two zeros in a row is mania, effectively. I can actually get through it a sleepless night and kind of squash it the next night and not slide into a manic state. But two zeros has happened 3 times in my life, and all three have been mania or on the verge, which is for me an unacceptably high risk to take, which means that I need to head off those mood swings like at the pass. Like the time to address it isn't when it's 2 hours, it's when it's going from 5 to 4. When it's like I'm still functioning. There's plenty of parents who woke up this morning who slept 4 hours last night, and they're going to have to do their whole day. But for me, I just can't afford to do multiple 4-hour days. So I have to take extreme measures like cancel work. Like I can't, I've got to treat it like a sick day. Like I got to treat it like the flu, I got to tell everyone, hey, I need to take the next 2 days off and get my sleep back on track. So the first step in that is just transparency around sleep. So every morning, the first thing I do is I take a Fitbit sleep report and I take a screenshot of it. This is this morning's, 7 hours, 5 minutes. I don't know if you can see it. An hour and 40 minutes of REM. And REM is kind of more important than hours. So like under an hour of REM is bad. Over 2 is bad. Anything like 115 to 145 is good. So I can kind of see from my sleep reports what's happening mood-wise. And then I send it every morning to a WhatsApp group that has my doctor, wife, sister, and mom. My doctor and wife because they need to know. My sister and mom because it helps them sleep better at night. Because we all understand how clearly, like, if I'm between 6 and 8, I'm just like a straight up non-mood disordered person. Like I'm just like solid. I'm asymptomatic entirely. And plus the therapy and the medication, I shouldn't make this joke, but I feel like I'm one of the most stable people in the world if I've slept the right amount because I've got an amazing medical, pharmacological regimen too. And then the sleep and the therapy, it all ties together with medication. Because we figured out, all right, what's the one medication I take every day? It's a mood stabilizer. It's like my ride or die. I'm like in a relationship with this medication.
Yeah.
I love it.
Right.
It's like bedrock to my life. And then we have 4 others that get dialed in depending on going up or going down. And there's one medication that I call the hammer, where like if I'm headed up into mania, like hypomania, it's like a blanket that gets thrown on me. Those like 30-pound, 40-pound blankets?
Yep.
It's like 100 pounds. I'm just dead for 2 days and it sucks. It's the worst, this medication. But I also love it because I know what it's doing is it's preventing a manic episode. It's an antipsychotic that basically is like, you're done. Sorry, your flight up into psychosis was fun. We know you want to, save the world, but you're toast. And like, you're going to be very fuzzy.
Right.
And that's just the price that I pay. And because I don't want to take that medication, what I do when I see my sleep going down is I focus on like the lighter medications to like enable me to sleep. Because I don't want to get to that level of having to call in the hammer, as my doctor calls it. So I think sleep is so key. And we could talk about nutrition. That's kind of a new frontier, metabolic psychiatry. Great book that just came out called Brain Energy. Suggested for bipolar, a ketogenic diet is good. So I've been playing with that, which is a hard diet to keep, but that I'm actually enjoying it, mostly because I lose weight and I just feel better.
Awesome.
Separate from it. But yeah, it takes a whole regimen.
Absolutely.
It takes a whole regimen: sleep, nutrition, exercise, physician, therapy, and medication. It's a lot. It's a
It
lot to
is.
take on. It's also really good for life to have this regimen, more is possible. So anyway.
I love that. Yeah. And these are strategies that folks who have serious mental illness, like you and I, we have to uphold and protect, at the cost of sometimes obligations to other people, obligations to our work, etc. but they're really strategies that are useful for anybody because, like you said, life is hard. And if you have certain ways of knowing that you can sort of warden off like the most catastrophic ways of being sort of drained upon by everything that's around you and in you, if you have ways of protecting yourself and bolstering yourself and really feeling like the best version of yourself, those are strategies that are useful all around.
100%. How lucky we are, Devika.
Absolutely. To have had to look, deep and hard at what those look like in our own lives and to know now that we are the best versions of ourselves because we've put in that really hard work and we have these really, intricate systems of figuring out how to stay in that 4 to 6 ideally range for sure. So one last question for you, Andy. I know you've shared with us some really incredible insights so far already. What are your hopes as you look forward to the future for all of us collectively?
I think that this thing we're facing with mental health, even the broader societal trend we're talking about, might lack a diagnosis or whatever of social isolation and of loneliness. And, I happen to be working on a new project where the goal is to get people together in real life in small groups, kind of restoring our tribal innate nature. And I think our nature has been infringed upon by smartphones.
Yes.
And lots of other things, right? So there's a lot going on mental health wise, like setting aside mental illness. It really is, in my worldview anyway, something that affects 100% of us. And we don't really fund it. We don't really treat it financially. We don't invest in it. Just a really easy example is if you have a premier employment situation, you probably have, on top of your physical, regular medical health insurance, dental and vision. And the reason you have dental and vision is that your medical health insurance doesn't reimburse for dental and vision. Well, that's kind of the situation with mental health, right? Like the reimbursement rates are so low. My therapy, for example, my doctor's wildly good and wildly expensive.
Yeah. And out of pocket, likely.
$1,000 for 45 minutes.
Whew. That is not cheap.
It's insane. Whatever. Pun intended. I don't care. And, my insurance, my regular health insurance reimburses $90. Who can afford $910 out of pocket twice a week? I can barely afford it because I've been so lucky in the business world. So the ability to find the right care and then to pay for it is a massive thing we need to take on. And it's not like this is not possible.
Right.
The state of North Carolina has got a bill up right now that is bipartisan for an extra $1 billion in funding to bolster Medicaid for mental health. For $150 million of it is for mental health in the prison system. State of New York has got an initiative. So we need to do this. And if you can hear the ambulance in the background, that is just underscoring this point. This is an emergency.
Absolutely.
This is a
emergency, and then the alarm went off. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it's an emergency, and it's going to require insurance companies to do more. Insurance companies don't have an incentive to do more unless corporations force them to with their collective bargaining power. And then we need mental health professionals to make it easier to get reimbursed by not doing stuff like, well, you pay me in cash and then you deal with it yourself.
Right.
So we need to come together as a mental health care provider community. We need to come together, government. We need to come together, corporations, both insurance companies and the rest of us that use insurance companies. And we need to put our money where our mouth is on this, because like we can write New York Times articles every day on this. We can talk a lot. We can cover whatever celebrities' issues du jour. But if we don't invest in it,
right,
we're not going to get that much better. And I remember sitting with the head of the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and she just walked me through it. She's like, do you want to guess what the budget is of the American Heart Association? Do you want to guess what the budget is of the American Diabetes Association? And now do you want to guess what our budget is as the largest not-for-profit mental health-driven organization in the country? And I won't get the numbers exactly right, but it was something like 70 million, 50 million, and 6 million. And part of it is, I think, there's no stigma to donating to the American Heart Association. There's no societal affect to saying we care about this issue because we've lived it in our family. And when Sergey Brin and the founder of Roblox and his wife, this other private equity guy whose name escapes me, did this $150, $200 million donation to bipolar research last year, I thought, yes, we're seeing the famous rich people who are affected by this shit actually funding it in a public way.
Right.
And that's what we need. We need conspicuous disclosure. So we can all be like, oh, wait, this isn't just me. This isn't just my family. And we need, local, state, federal, corporate, health community combined effort. And the best news, by the way, is, and you know this well as, in your career, it's happening. This is happening. It may not be happening fast enough, but it feels like the zeitgeist is shifting under our feet right now. It's a great opportunity. It's a great time to be alive on this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think how you framed it as 100% of families are affected by this, I could not agree with you more. And I think that, yes, it's slow in coming. And yes, NAMI's budget is way less than the AHA and the American Diabetes Association. And that needs to shift. But I feel like in our lifetimes, we may actually see that parity coming into being for once and for all in a way that I don't think was ever possible in previous generations.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Thanks for your work on it. This is amazing.
Well, thanks so much, Andy, for helping to shine the light and to spread the light with everything that you do. And really, really appreciate your being here with us.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.